Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. I got a really good remark from a viewer on the video I did yesterday on distributions, and I wanted to follow it up because it got me thinking about a couple other things that are kind of important to talk about with this stuff. So he said that he recalled a video where Rudy said that you needed to open about 420 boxes to smooth out the variability. And when he made that remark, I recalled it myself that there was a video maybe sometime in the last 12 or 18 months, and Rudy said something like, going through opening 240 or 300 or 360 or 420 or 480 or 540 or 600 boxes, how that kind of affects the overall average outcome and the variability as you open more and more and more boxes. And so the commenter's claim of, 420 boxes might be where it starts to even out. The devil is in the details. So let's talk about this. So I went ahead and just redrew, we'll call this Baldur's Gate draft. So this is the distribution of box values that you might get. And this line here is the average, also known as the EV. This is what we always talk about. The average booster box price were you to open all the boxes and take the average. And so we also, in the previous video, which I'll link up there, we derived something called standard error of the mean. And that was going to be the standard deviation of these values divided by the square root of n. And if you'll recall, that would give you a dollar value for basically the standard deviation you would get by opening n boxes. How much away from the real EV might you expect to land, or what range around the real EV might you expect to land in some percentage of the time. So go back and watch the previous video if you don't remember from yesterday. And then the next thing I had done there was I talked about something that I kind of called the normalized standard error of the mean, because it doesn't quite always make sense to talk about standard error of the mean denominated in dollars, which is what it comes out to, because your standard deviation is in dollars because this horizontal axis is in dollars. It doesn't always make sense, because what if we were going to compare doing a mass box opening today of something really cheap like Crimson Vow collector boxes against something really expensive like Double Masters 2022 draft boxes? So there's over a factor of 2 difference between those two things. So if we just computed standard errors of the mean of theoretical mass box openings of both at the same n number of boxes opened, we would get vastly different numbers and they wouldn't be comparable. So if we take a normalized standard error of the mean and we say that that's going to be sigma over EV times the square root of n, then we've normalized it to the real average value of the box. And now we can talk about them on even footing. And we can say that your variability of opening n boxes is some percentage relative to the EV. And that way we can take these two different products and we can compare the risk between them. And so the interesting thing to realize about this is when we get into this question of, does 420 boxes even out the variability? Does it smooth it out and make things kind of safe for whatever your definition of safe is? You see that the normalized standard error of the mean is proportional to 1 over n squared, and it's also proportional to the standard deviation over EV. Now, the standard deviation over EV is the same within each set. So every time you do a mass box opening of Baldur's Gate draft boxes on the same day where the markets have not moved yet, your standard deviation over EV will be the same. But if you do it on a different set on that same day, that different set has a different standard deviation and a different EV. Now, to the extent that it's proportional to 1 over the square root of n, that means that opening more boxes always helps smooth out the variability and reduce your risk. And so I just kind of made this table here of various values of n. So, if you go off and you do a mass opening of 1 box, then your 1 over square root of n is 1. And if you add 1 more box, you've reduced your variability by 30%, because 1 over square root of n is reduced to 0.7. You'll still have the same standard deviation, you'll still have the same EV, but you've reduced the 1 over square root of n factor by 30% by just opening a second box. And so then I put 17, which is what I opened. I put 30, which is where I said on the previous video, kind of comes out to that 5% 1 sigma interval bound. And then I put 100 and 419 and 420, and I'll tell you the reasons I did those. So I showed that way out there at 420, you still get a little bit of a gain. 1 part in 500 gain in additional marginal reduction of variability by adding that 420th box. But what you can look and see between opening 100 boxes and opening 420 boxes is you've only reduced your variability again by about half. Now, so it is true that opening 420 boxes, it's just a lot of boxes. That helps your variability. But you're still at the mercy of this part. And this is what you really need to talk about. This is what's interesting to think about between sets. So I have this Baldur's Gate draft distribution here. Let's think about the distribution of another set. What does the distribution of 2020 Commander cases look like? It just looks like that because it's a pre-constructed product with no variability. This is the EV, and no matter what case you open of it, assuming we're not talking about like crazy misprint cards or something silly like that, no matter what, you will always get the same amount of value out of it. And so were you to come over here and calculate the normalized standard error of the mean for 2021 Commander cases, the standard deviation is 0. So you do not deviate from the EV, from the average. And so it doesn't matter how many boxes you open, your mass box opening results will be the same, whether you open 1 box or 420 or 600 boxes. And so you can think of cases in between there, examples in between this kind of ridiculous edge case and this kind of applicable real world case. You can think of things like booster boxes prior to Throne of Eldraine, before the beginning of this current flashy era, where there were fewer variants, where basically your variants were typically foils. And maybe you didn't have box toppers, or in a particular one that we might want to consider, it would be one without box toppers because those add a lot more variability. And so back in those days, the ratio of standard deviation to EV would have been smaller than it is now. And so today, because you can go out and you can get a Ancient Copper Dragon in the basic version, and it's $55, I'll call it. And then you have several other variations, all the way up to the borderless foil Ancient Copper Dragon that's something like $140. And then you also have the promo version of that. I don't even know how expensive that is. But you can see that the variability caused by all these variant of cards would make the standard deviation go way up, which means you need to get a bigger contribution out of that 1 over n squared term in order to bring the variability back down and protect yourself. So yes, it's true that opening more and more and more boxes always helps you. Every additional marginal box you open further decreases the variability, but set to set, it may not decrease it as much. So a set with super high variability, the far out boxes may not make as much of a difference as the earlier boxes that you open from a set that just naturally has lower variability because there are fewer variants. Maybe it's a smaller set to start with, so there's just fewer cards in it, things like that. So you can imagine that today things like set boxes themselves probably have pretty high variability because you can theoretically get like a 5 mythic pack. You have the list slot that's just all over the place, from literally 1 cent garbage cards, Urborg Panther, all the way up to just amazing mythic reprints of classic cards that have huge value. So think about those things, and just keep in mind that you would have to do this analysis for every product that you might consider opening. And yeah, eventually you would gain a feel for it and you wouldn't really need to do this analysis. This is more of kind of a theoretical study of, can we apply some mathematics in an intelligent way and try to figure out a way to quantify our risk. And so I imagine if you were just starting out doing this kind of thing like I am, this is an interesting study to do to see, well, what kind of additional protection against variability do I gain if I were to go from 17 boxes to 30. But if you've been doing this for a while and you have good experience with it, you may just be able to look at MTG Box Sim, click it for 5 minutes, get a pretty good feel, and be successful enough. Especially if you are a card store and you have access to wholesale pricing, that helps buffer your risk a lot. So let me know what you think, any questions you have, any other interesting comments, because I thought this one was good enough to make a whole nother video about. Otherwise, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join me on Final Trade. Join the Patreon. Thanks a lot.